There's this sense that the 9/11 terrorist attacks came out of nowhere. They didn't. 9/11 came after 11 years of deliberate moves across a global chessboard. This is Blindspot, The Road to 9/11. I'm Jim O'Grady. In this podcast, we'll revisit the evidence and question the people at the center of the story.
The magnitude and the significance of this threat was communicated over and over again.
We'll follow the investigators, the bureaucrats and beat cops who chased disturbing clues about a new kind of enemy.
I don't want to use the word panic, but the sudden chilling feeling a devastating plot might well be underway.
Let's penetrate his cell and find out what's really going on.
I have lived with Osama bin Laden for more than 12 years, very close to him.
If you wanted him dead, he would have been dead 2 years ago for 50 cents in one round of ammunition.
I was so very angry, and I promised him revenge.
This is also a story about small moments when flawed human beings made decisions under terrible pressure with partial information.
Look, it's always easy in hindsight to say it's a big mistake.
Of course, we couldn't connect the dots. There were so many dots. The whole page was black.
It's about a disaster that some saw coming but didn't respond to until too late.
I said, I told you these bastards are coming back.
Blindspot, The Road to 9/11.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Green Space. We are here on the eve of WNYC Studios and History's brand new podcast called Blindspot, The Road to 9/11. The show creators are here with me, and we're going to dig into how the show came to be, the challenges that went into retelling the story, one that many of us lived through if you were living here in 2001, and how they uncover these new insights into this infamous moment in American and world history. First, I'm here with my colleague and show host, Jim O'Grady. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Arun, I'm going to start by saying something sincere. I really miss seeing you in the WNYC newsroom.
Can we take a second and just talk about, I do too. It's good to see you here, and congrats. This is a pretty amazing podcast, what I've heard. The first two episodes is very exciting. And so I'm glad that we can, chat about that, because you and I were both journalists at that time when it happened. And clearly we're living through a very different moment. We can reflect on that through this incredible series that you've created with this team at WNYC Studios. Very briefly, what is the show about?
Well, we cover the lead up to 9/11. Sort of the last moments of the 8 episodes is the morning of, is the attack. And so we want you to understand as a listener, everything, if not everything, so many of the forces, the personalities, the people that went into that moment. So we cover the 11 years leading up to it. And we choose as our starting point an assassination in the Midtown Marriott Hotel on a November night in 1990, when a Muslim extremist named Saeed Nasser gunned down a Zionist ultranationalist, Rabbi Meir Kahane. And at the time, it seemed like a bizarre sort of outburst of violence, maybe with roots in the Middle East. But looking back now, we can tell it's the start of a long trail of associations and connections and actions that ultimately lead to 9/11. And the podcast takes you on that trail.
This is what I loved in terms of just the writing and setting us there. You say early on in episode 1, you say there are so many places where we could start, including with the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the rise of the Western powers. But you choose to start, as you say, a hushed little house in New Jersey on November 5th, 1990. And it kind of keeps it really local. And did it take you a lot of time to kind of get to this very kind of intimate, I guess, approach to this podcast when you could have gone very big?
Great question. I can give credit to two sources for that. This is a collaboration with the History Channel. This is an adaptation from their video documentary, Road to 9/11, which came out a few years ago. We've completely remade it from top to bottom and made it sort of an original thing in an 8-episode podcast. But they were the ones that found that person, Zach Ibrahim, who was a child when his father stepped out of their house in New Jersey and committed what is arguably the very first act in the War on Terror. This was in 1990. And it is such an intimate moment. That's one thing we wanted people to experience, that these are global events with catastrophic consequences and sometimes large body counts. But they also, we wanted people to understand the personal impact of these events leading up to 9/11. So it was our senior producer, Jenny Lawton, who has a child herself, who said, let's sleep with this let's start with this sleeping child in bed, which is sort of the quintessential scene of vulnerability and someone who needs protection right at the moment where all of these things we thought were true about America being somewhat invulnerable from foreign attack, mass casualty attacks, start to unravel. At first, very mysteriously, and then gradually law enforcement starts to catch on, and we tell that story as well.
Well, that is a really beautiful line in that same episode that you write, and really stayed with me. You say, this is also the moment when America's ingrained sense of ordained invulnerability starts to erode. Why do you say that's the moment, or that's the moment when it starts to erode? We're looking at this now when we don't know if our democracy is going to last, beyond the next few months. You're kind of placing us at a very different moment now, about 30 years ago, as being another key moment.
Yeah. Arun, of course, it's all provisional. It's in that particular moment. The United States has just gone through the Cold War, World War II, and then the Cold War. Certainly, we didn't feel like we were living threat-free on this planet. But in that particular moment, the Berlin Wall has fallen. The United States has won the Cold War. And we do seem briefly like we have no challengers. And it was Ronald Reagan who used to get up in front of Congress and give these speeches where he would say, God placed our nation between these oceans so we could not suffer the kind of attack that other countries have to worry about. So it's sort of that almost, dare I say, religious sense of our mission in the world that made it seem like, okay, we've reached the end of the Cold War. We have the peace dividend. Now everything's fine. Everyone loves us. We have no problems. We're like a child sleeping in bed.
Yeah. I mean, that's the great thing. The interplay in this series between the big ideas, empires, past and present empires that are eroding, the interplay between various empires, if you will, the American Empire and at least the idea of the Ottoman and the attempt to kind of recreate this that's happening in the Middle East and landing on our shores. But despite all these huge ideas and this kind of, very serious kind of approach to this very serious subject, there is also, what I loved is the sense of delight in this podcast. You're really, you're deep in the sandbox. You're chancing upon all these extraordinary moments, these kooky characters who helped shape history right here in our backyard.
Yeah.
The language really pops, the writing. And in terms of just tone, as you all approach this, because clearly tone is something you all have to, as a team, kind of really agree on in different ways. This does not feel like something that could have been made in the immediate post 9/11 era. And I'm wondering, as a journalist who was working then, who covered it then, and who's now looking at it anew, did you feel a sense of possibility of creative freedom that you did not in 2002, 2005, 2008?
Yeah, Arun, this is a very serious question. We had to tell this story in a very fair way. We had to, for example, separate out the idea of religion and politics. So we take great pains to say that the major figures like Osama bin Laden, and we have this person, the blind sheikh, who sets up camp in Jersey City and forms a cell around himself, they were motivated by the desire to impose kind of a purist version of Islam, mostly on their home countries. And so this is what animated them, but what they really, really objected to was American foreign policy and what they considered to be America's imperialistic aims. And we also talk about how personal ambition came into this. You got to start this around the time Zach Ebrahim falls asleep in his bed in suburban New Jersey. The Afghanistan war is also ending. The Soviets invade Afghanistan in the early 80s, and then for 9 years, the Afghan rebels and so-called Arab fighters from around the world come and defeat them. Osama bin Laden is one of their leaders. The blind sheikh, he's one of their leaders. And at the end of it, they look around the world and they try to decide what next. And they see, Osama bin Laden sees Saudi Arabia, his home country, is propped up by a royal family with an oil for military protection deal with the US, and he sees it as corrupt and un-Islamic. And then the blind sheikh looks at his home country, Egypt, and he sees something very similar. And they start asking the question, who's behind all of these secular Muslim states that they consider fallen? And the answer is always the same. It's the United States. So they decide that by attacking or beginning to lay the groundwork for attacking the United States both fits their politics and their personal ambition. They think they can ride such attacks to power in their own home countries. There was another part of your question. I feel like I might be overlooking.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is, in that era, you felt such a sense of this whole thing is sort of like a sacred subject. Do not tread very lightly. We had people all around us that we were covering, if you were a journalist back then, that had this sort of sense of moral authority. What they said, you had to, there was a sort of sense of, I guess nationalism was very much in the air. It was very much in our midst as journalists. And it made it in some ways difficult to cover it with, I suppose, the kind of verve that you bring to this series. That's what I'm getting at is if you see this, is it simply that, time's gone on and people have moved on and we can do this, or was there something else going on?
One thing we get out of the way right away is that the idea that Islam somehow by its nature motivates such acts, false, wrong. We're not even entertaining that as an idea. This was a specific set of men that came out of a crucible called the Afghan War, where they came and they met each other and they made connections and they developed this ideology they called jihad. They took a beautiful Islamic concept of sort of spiritual struggle and they gave it a singular, narrow definition of holy war, really. And they made an extremist movement that then sent out cells around the world and started following their agenda. So we stress very much so that, say, the blind sheikh, he was an influential preacher to some, but he was so far on the fringe when it came to mainstream Islam and even mainstream Muslim culture and life. So I think once you establish that and once you set those parameters, and you treat everyone as a human being, and you don't say, look, these people were lunatics and evil incarnate. No, they were rational actors. They were evildoers who committed evil acts, but they were following a politically coherent program in their own minds and according to their own political ideology. And it's worth it for us to understand what that is instead of just sort of turning away and just feeling repulsed.
And it's not just, I guess, people from the Islamic world that you're talking about in terms of the main players. You also have Charlie Wilson, who kind of enters the picture here and there and is scored I guess, very sexily with some nice wah-wah pedal, and is first seen, if you will, in your podcast in a hot tub in Las Vegas with some strippers. A very different tone from what we might have heard if we were to, or seen if we were to see a documentary in 2006 about, sober analysis of September 11th attacks.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you for bringing up the scene with Congressman Charlie Wilson in a Vegas hot tub with showgirls, where he has this epiphany that he needs to support the Mujahideen in the Afghan war. I love him as a character because even if you agree with everything he did and his sort of lobbying Congress and the CIA to spend $3 billion to support the rebels in the Afghan war, the way he did it is just something so quintessentially American about it, just blundering into it. He was at the time called the most ineffective member of Congress, and you could see him thinking, "Oh, here's a noble cause. If I connect myself to this, maybe I'll raise my reputation." He just goes full force into it, doesn't worry about the nuance. Neither does the CIA, really. And we get what's classically known as a blowback situation. We create all of these militants in one place at one time who learn the capabilities of warfare, who learn asymmetrical warfare against a larger power and an army, and who then, when it's all over, look around at who they consider their real enemy to be. They fix on the United States, and all of that capability and animosity gets aimed at us. Thank you, Charlie Wilson.
Charlie Wilson, a great character. The city, New York City, is a great character in this. You really kind of take us into some amazing places in New Jersey, in Midtown Manhattan, in Brooklyn, the site of the site of what is now the Barclays Center. Were there any particular surprises for you? Things that you're pretty well read when it comes to history. As you were working on this project, what are some of the things that really surprised you? What did you learn that you didn't know before?
Well, if you remember the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the Ayatollah Khomeini is in Paris when it all goes down. And then there's this popular uprising, and he swoops in and takes control of the country. Well, the blind sheikh wanted to do something similar with himself and Egypt. And where did he set up camp? Jersey City, New Jersey. The same as Paris, basically.
You're right. It's the Paris of
it's the Paris
New Jersey,
of Northern New Jersey. Yes, exactly.
Where is it? You described this one place also as the Nowheresville in Northern Jersey, where little 7-year-old character has grown up. This sort of sense that certain turns of history, they don't come from some huge, big political, awareness. They come from people who just feel like they're kind of cast off by life and, just normal routines.
You're describing Zach Ibrahim's father, Saeed Nusser, who became an assassin. Certainly that's the case with him. Why does the blind sheikh come to Jersey City? Really, he comes to the New York City area because this is where the money is. This is where the media is. This is where the organizational power was for him to form a terrorist cell. So that's why he comes here. I was a little surprised by that. And I was surprised by an amazing connection in this story. When President Anwar el-Sadat of Egypt is assassinated in 1981, there's a soldier at the parade ground who's devastated by it. And his name is Imad Salem. And he makes a vow he's going to find the person who inspired this assassination, and he's going to get revenge against him. So Imad Salem immigrates to America. He's living a quiet life on the Upper West Side. He's at work one day, and the FBI knocks on his door. And of course, it's the blind sheikh who, in his private mind, is his enemy. And the FBI just says to him, "Would you mind infiltrating this? We think there's a terrorist cell with this guy called the Blind Sheikh in Jersey City." And Imad Salem basically says to them, "Where have you been all my life? What took you so long to find me? Of course I will do this." And it is just nuts. It's bananas what he does. He goes undercover. He becomes a mole in this very dangerous cell. Every morning he wakes up, he gives breakfast to his kids, and then he does something that could end his life. If he got found out, he could be offed any second.
Is that like a choo-choo train? What does that sound I hear in the background?
It is. I muted it. I muted it too late.
Oh, okay, sorry. Go. I want to bring on some of the other members of the team who's behind this podcast. Before I do that, I just want to say something about the team that helped put together this virtual event that you're a spectator to. If you are enjoying this show, please consider giving the Green Space team the gift of your email address. We would love to keep in touch with you. We don't need your number. We don't even need to schedule a Zoom with you, but we just want to email you now and then and let you know about all the other great shows, such as this, that happen right here in the virtual green space. And maybe one day when we're no longer virtual, you can come to the actual green space in Soho. And if you are down with that, being kept in touch with, just text the letters TGS to 70101. It's right on your screen right now, I'm told. We'll text you right back and get you signed up for our newsletter so you will never miss a show you want to see. All right, back to our show. I want to bring on some of the other members of the team. That would be producer Ursula Sommer, editor Jenny Lawton, and technical director Joe Plourde. Hey, y'all.
Hello.
Joe,
Hey.
Jenny, Ursula. Welcome.
Yeah.
Look at that reveal. What an amazing one-by-one reveal. That's the internet's totally changing the way we communicate, you guys. Actually, why don't we hear, if we have time, I think let's go ahead and hear a clip from the series, another clip, and then we can kind of talk about that. Let's go.
One bullet. Saeed Nasser's shot rips through the rabbi's throat. Kahana goes down. In the pandemonium, Nasser flees toward a rear exit. A Kahana supporter grabs him and tries to put him in a bear hug, but Nasser shoots the man in the leg. He then hurries out and down a set of stairs, runs through the lobby, and bursts onto Manhattan's busy streets. John Miller says,
The gunman jumps into a taxi, pulls out this pistol, and tells the taxi driver, "Go, go."
They drive a couple of blocks before they're stopped. It's not clear why. Either another Kahana supporter blocks the cab, or the more New York explanation, there's just too much damn traffic.
At this moment, a U.S. Postal Service police officer is coming up the street and he sees a guy pointing a gun to the head of a taxi driver.
Right then, a Kahana supporter spots Nasser and starts banging on the window. In the confusion, the driver leaps out of his door to safety. Nasser slips out the other side of the taxi, only to find himself facing the Postal Service policeman who's aiming a pistol right at him.
So he engages the suspect and then gets in a shootout on Lexington Avenue
in front of witnesses who described the scene to reporters.
And the guy was running down the street, and the guy shot at the post office man, and it hit him in the arm, and then the post office man shot him.
The officer actually takes a slug not to his arm, but to his bulletproof vest. His shot drops Nasser.
The ambulances get there. One takes Meyer Kahani away, who's gravely wounded, to Bellevue Hospital. The other takes El Said Nasser also to Bellevue Hospital. And then, in this surreal moment, they end up side by side, separated by a few feet, while doctors work feverishly to save the target of an assassination, and right next to him, the assassin.
So that's my voice you hear in that clip, but none of that happens. There's so much going on behind the scenes to make that clip sing and to make it move and to make it exciting. And these other three people you see here, they're the ones that made it happen.
Jenny, do you want to tell us a little more about, like, you know, I mean, from your perspective, what goes into making, you know, a scene like this? You know, there's so much on the back end of what the decisions going into this. What were some of them?
Yeah, so for folks who haven't heard the podcast yet, this is at the kind of the middle point of the first episode, right after Marikana is shot. And I think the feeling that we were all going for is that this is a moment when the action just propels forward, and we were really excited to take people along for the ride and kind of have them follow this, what we call kind of internally as a team, is the chase scene. We got this great tape from History, from the documentary that was made by Left Right. And so we really kind of piggybacked on that. We wanted to try to evoke the scene visually as much as we could. So that happened in Jim's narration, but also in the scoring to create a mood or kind of the feeling of a pulse racing and of movement forward in space. And then also we had this fantastic news footage from that moment. And so, we wanted people to experience what it might have felt like to hear this story unfold in real time. So we tried to kind of combine all those elements in a way that was tight and compelling and move the story forward.
Yeah, I mean, and in real time, and I guess we have to remind ourselves, for people back then, it's like, oh, it's one of the kinds of things that, as Jim sort of sets up, this is like crazy 1990 New York City where crazy things are happening like all the time. And you have to kind of like filter them out, not knowing that some of these crazy things are going to like build into these catastrophic moments in American history. Ursula, you produce a series. You're the one who's listening to all this tape. You're writing scripts, really pulling things together from all over the place. Just give us a sense of what it takes to get some of these archival clips. I mean, was this just a mountain of sound you're dealing with?
Well, usually I would start out, Jim would give me, I want to hear maybe someone's voice saying this, or I heard that someone maybe said this. So he gives me a bunch of clues basically to go off of, usually a person or era or a topic or a loose date. And then I kind of go in and do my own research to try and find said clip. With any luck, I find an approximation of it or the actual thing that we were looking for. And then I reach out to the archive that owns the clip, and we begin those conversations about licensing. And that's kind of how things come.
Yeah. And so how long ago did this process start?
We began the research about 5 months ago, almost exactly, a little more.
Wow.
So
good timing. This is March.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I don't think they even factored that in, that your timing was quite that timely. For everybody's watching, I just want to let you know, we're gonna in a minute or two, give you an opportunity if you have questions for any of these people, for Ursula, Jim, Jenny, Joe here. Joe, you're the technical director. You're in charge of the overall sound of the show, from audio quality to mixing, to adding music, sound effects. Jim and I were talking a few minutes ago about Charlie Wilson, and it had this very surprising, delightful sort of just kind of like erotic feel. I feel like a little sleazy, and also very surprising. It's not what I'm expecting in a 9/11, gravitas kind of a moment. Give me a little sense about the vibe that you're creating, and what you're maybe trying to also avoid, given that this is 9/11.
That's a really great question, because this scoring something like this, is really a balancing act. Because you're really trying to emotionally support and kind of contour the narrative without it becoming like too overwrought or too saccharine, too intense, or too comical or cartoonish. So it's really about keeping it simple and kind of just being mindful of the context. Like the Charlie Wilson part is probably the most cartoonish part in a large part of the series, but it kind of warrants it because that scene is so over the top, but it only works in that context. But music, it's just has such a powerful influence on the subconscious of the listener. And it not only does it cue an emotional response, but it also, you can use it to embody characters or signify certain types of scenes. And we were really lucky to be working with a tailor-made music library for the better part of this show that was composed by an incredible musician and composer and sound designer named Isaac Jones. And I think he made us like 10 to 12 songs or something, but he gave them to us all in stems. So for those of you who don't know, it's going to get a tiny bit technical here, but
that's what we're here.
They're like stems are just like, you just get each song instead of just as one file as like, this is the song, you get the drums as a file, and then you get the piano as a file, and then you get like the tuba as a file, you know, so you kind of get it all broken out. And that really allows you to mix and match and kind of like make bespoke arrangements for each scene. So through that, I was able to, you know, create a little, you know, music that would embody Ahmad Salem. There's like a little violin figure that introduces him every time he makes an appearance. There's like a noir bass, kind of like old school detective-y, like law enforcement music that kind of like anytime we go to a law enforcement person talking about, oh, we were at this part of the process and then we had this discovery, like that'll usually be in the background. And just like things like that. And it's really, you know, it's like, as I said before, it's a balancing act because you don't want it to be overwrought. You don't want it to be saccharine. You don't want it to be too intense, but you want it to feel and you want it to move. So, I mean, that's what I'm trying to do. And, you know, hopefully we're threading that needle.
No, it's great. I never felt like it overstepped anything. It's added so much to the character of the series. The fact that you've done this sort of like we expect in TV shows or movies where different characters have different feels or, instruments associated with them. That's just fascinating. Again, for anybody who has a question, feel free to comment on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching, and we'll get to them in a few minutes. Jenny, as the editor, you calling the shots about what goes in and what is left out of the story. I'm sure that's a huge challenge, even for a single article or story that we might do, a feature that's hard enough. Here you're doing a huge sort of like epic retelling with all these different dimensions of it. Were there certain like really great moments that that really pained you that you had to kind of leave out?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And I'll start by saying it was not all my decision. It was a negotiation between me and
Yeah, sure. Like, I don't have any power.
Yes, because Jim had done a ton of research in addition to this fabulous footage, 60 interviews that we got from the history documentary.
Wow.
Jim had read in deeply on this subject and all of its tentacles into other subjects. And so, to borrow a phrase from Joe, it was really a balancing act of trying to figure out, when do we nod to the global? When do we stay local? When do we stop and we pause on a beautiful detail? And when do we keep the story moving forward? There's a metaphor that I lean on is that if you're on a road trip, you need to get to your destination. You can't keep looking at scenic overpasses every so often. You have to choose them really wisely. And that was hard. And one thing that comes to mind is it was as audio producers and narrative audio storytellers, we live for these moments, these little details that tell you a lot about a scene. And there was this tape that actually Ursula found where John Miller, who you heard in that last clip, he was a reporter, and he was, at the time that Kahana was shot, he was at an Italian restaurant having dinner. And he went on to describe the really vivid scene of what he was having, what kind of a restaurant it was. And it was just, we loved this tape. But it wasn't the thing that we needed at that moment in the story. And so it just had to go. Whereas some of the other things that Jim dug out, one of my favorites is, talking about Zach Ibrahim, the 7-year-old boy, Jim uncovered that that night he was wearing his Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle pajamas.
Yeah.
And that tells you so much about the time and so much about the kid. And that when he left the house, he held onto his blanket. He was young enough that he still had a blanket. So those were the things that, those were really quick details. It didn't take much time to keep in, but that we felt really special.
Yeah, no, that was a beautiful detail very early on in episode 1. We have
Arun, can I just add really quickly? So in the narrative, a rabbi is shot, and John Miller is giving a sumptuous description of like fried linguine and special sauces, and Ursula and I are saying to Jenny, well, don't we want that? And she's like, no, guys, no, a rabbi has been shot.
Hold the linguine.
Yeah, hold the linguine. Cut the linguine. That's Jenny's job, to cut the linguine.
So we have a few questions from viewers. Some heavy questions here, and some of this will touch on larger issues about storytelling. But I'll throw out one of them. It's one viewer who is not labeled here. How do we process the asymmetry of the American response to the 9/11 attacks? Meaning, on one hand, yes, thousands of Americans died, but orders of magnitude more Afghans and Iranians were killed in response. Obviously, every series and every documentary cannot necessarily get at every question, but I'm wondering if there's something about this asymmetry, superpower, that has been sort of, I guess, brought down or brought down a notch. Is this something that you're in any way grappling with?
Of course, that's what a terrorist wants. A terrorist wants an overreaction. A terrorist creates an act of violence that's also an act of theater. A terrorist targets a symbolic something. In the case here, it was the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and potentially the Capitol buildings, all seats of American power and global capitalism. So in a way, to the extent that the American response has been disproportionate since 9/11, it's what the terrorists have wanted. So, you know, listeners can judge how far is too far in responding to 9/11, but this is called asymmetrical warfare. I think in one of the attacks we describe, I think on the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, I think the ingredients for the bomb cost $400. So a terrorist takes that and turns it to his advantage, creates a spectacle, and then the superpower overreacts, and we go from there. And that's been our last 19 years.
Just according to plan, the overreaction, and then the radicalization of people who feel that the overreaction is the real story, not the initial attack of 9/11 attacks necessarily.
You say that. That's one interpretation.
Yeah. Here's another question. Has to do with anti-Muslim bias. Did you encounter anti-Muslim bias in your research? And how did you navigate that in the retelling of this story?
Yeah, Arun, it's interesting. We have a CIA officer, actually, Arturo Munoz, who I think is fairly well perceptive about how, so we could have started the end of the Ottoman Empire in 1923 and the humiliation of the Arab world when the Western powers draw up these somewhat arbitrary boundaries of countries in the Middle East. So yeah, that is wounded pride. It plays a part of a role in the motivation of those who attacked us. But curiously, we looked very carefully at the statements and the writings of the people who brought these attacks about, such as Ramzi Youssef, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Osama bin Laden. And we didn't see very much of anything. I didn't see anything complaining of what we would now call Islamophobia. Islamophobia, which has become a major issue in American life, particularly since 9/11. So the mistreatment of Muslim immigrants in America certainly existed before 9/11, no question about that. But it seems not to have been a major motivating force for the attacks on 9/11. As I was saying before, it was more geopolitics, it was more personal ambition, it was more wounded pride at the fact that the West had risen and the Muslim world felt under the thumb of American power that was propping up governments that they didn't like.
Let's see. I guess we have about a minute. So fairly big question, but let's see if you can answer it, as succinctly as is possible. This viewer says, Jim said that the jihadi leaders were ambitious with their aims. Were they successful in their desire to rise to broader power?
They were not. The blind sheikh ultimately was not, and obviously Osama bin Laden was not, but they also had a goal of weakening and exposing weakness in America's seeming hegemonic power around the world, and they certainly were successful in that.
All right. Well done. That is all that we have time for with the Blindspot team tonight. But the podcast, of course, goes on. If you haven't, I highly encourage you to subscribe. It is really a fantastic, highly compelling and illuminating series. And I'm definitely looking forward, you guys, to the rest of the episodes to drop as soon as those do. Congratulations on making it.
Thank you, Arun.
Thank you, Arun.
Thanks, Arun.
One last thing. All right, that's it. Thank you for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to host you all tonight. I am Arun Venugopal with WNYC. Good night.
Good night. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.